pledge.
Today's the 7th, correct?
Thank you.
Good morning. Welcome everyone here to the Electrical Committee. Today is March 7th, 2024. Got quite the crew present today. Let's go ahead and introduce everybody. First of all, the appointed officials, Public Works Director Troy Kruger, City Attorney Paul Jensen, Councilman Ron Sprinkle, Jeremy Clay. We have Deputy Finance Officer Holly Lillebo with us today. And joining us are Kurt Hawkinson, Electrical Superintendent, Ty Bennett, the Foreman at the Electrical Department, and Jared Luzzi from DGR. I always want to say DRG because I work with DRG in broadcast also, so I struggle with that. DGR.
DGR.
Yeah, got it right. We have a lot of information for the public. I think there's going to be a lot of questions. This all goes back to our city council meeting 2 weeks ago about an analysis and putting together a plan going forward. So, Troy, do you want to start it off and direct us around here today?
Yeah, first of all, I'd laid an agreement between the city of Winter and DGR, so this needs to be signed. This would be an agreement for the year on phase one and moving forward. And and that's what Jared's here today to explain exactly where we're going with phase one and what we want to accomplish. There's the pay breakdown of his hourly rates and all that good stuff in here, but, so that'll have to be on the agenda for next council meeting, get that signed, so Jared, we can turn Jared loose on this phase one. Your financials are in front of you. If you have any questions on those, but otherwise I'm gonna jump right in. So last meeting, we discussed that we were gonna, while the iron's hot and that we've got Jared working diligently on this, we wanna keep our momentum going, so he's here today to give us a site visit and to kind of do an official kickoff for this phase one of this 15-year plan that they laid in front of us a month and a half ago. And I'll turn it over to Jared.
Right on, yeah. As I mentioned, the task order here presented for you guys for your review and approval basically includes preliminary design efforts for phase one improvements geared towards the substation, but not limited to that. So I know that we presented the CIP a few weeks ago, last month, and we have phases laid out there. And part of phase one is, the key component of phase one is substation upgrades. And what that looks like is essentially the low voltage side of the substation that the city of Winter, solely controls and operates. It ties to WAPA's, the Western Area Power's low voltage bus. So there's some interconnection nuances there that need to get ironed out in terms of really, delineating the scope as to what the city of Winter would be responsible for, what the limitations are because it's the WAPA's site. A number of those kind of details that need to get hammered out to really hone in on the scope. So really I don't know if you guys, if I'll have a chance to kind of just review the task items that are included in this. And there's also a financial component where we're accustomed to working with the city, the utilities, financial advisors. In this case, likely Missouri River, but that also could be a third-party financial advisor to work with what once we dial in a scope, what does the cash flow look like? When, there's obviously a design, bidding, procurement phase, and then there's a construction phase. So with public municipality, you have certain statutory bidding requirements, which essentially stages when payments would be made to each of those entities. We have a pretty good idea as to when the cash flow would hit. So we feed that into like the Missouri River rate analyst or whomever, your finance folks, to look at that. What does that do to the budget? We really dial in on the final scope of what the phase one improvements look like. And there's obviously a lot of, communication with you, Kurt, Ty, and Troy. Dial that in, what are you guys willing to spend? Essentially, you gotta go through this preliminary phase to set up the larger project, which may be even staged differently. So really right now, we're just looking at the CIP, capital improvements plan we presented is pretty high level. It's for budgeting. We got to drill down to get that budget finalized. We try to trim out contingencies. The more effort we put into design, the more we can pull out of the contingencies and essentially try to come in well under that budget. So that is a challenge because of the supply chain. I consider it a crisis that everybody's dealing with. If you look at any, probably Kurt's got some Padmount transformer prices that continue to shock and awe people, but that's, to our knowledge, that's not going to change. And so really the best way is to kind of jump into phase one here. And it's essentially an hourly estimate that we, for fees here, that there's really not a science to that. It's just gonna come in under, but we generally we come in at or under that estimated amount. Just depends on how much back and forth there is with WAPA, with Missouri River, et cetera. But anyway, it's kind of my spiel. Are there any questions on the task order?
Jared, I might just ask, on page 3 of the contract, it refers to things, and I'm probably a little bit ahead of myself here, but just understanding under this document, is there any kind of a ballpark guesstimate, upper end guesstimate with regard to these lump sum amounts that appear on that page 3?
Yeah, I'm gonna pull out my CIP here, because in there, you guys probably don't have this report, but at this point, yeah, we would say high level in that 8 to 10% of overall construction, probably closer to 8, but 8 to 10% of the overall costs in the CIP is gonna roughly be where we're at.
Okay.
With the engineering. So it's gonna be staged a little bit like, that's the whole part of it, is that we wanna dial in our scope, so we give you guys a firm price that doesn't change, it's just locked in, and then that's kind of part of what preliminary is doing, scoping that out, so.
Right, okay.
I'm looking for my numbers here.
It's like
and I can give you-
17, total project cost or total 15-year cost, is that what you're at?
Yeah, no, I'm more
Is that what you were asking?
way back here.
So I'm just looking at the contract itself, looking to
Yeah, let me
be able
tell
to
you here,
guesstimate
so-
where those numbers are gonna go.
Right, so really for this phase one improvements here, as I'm looking at the CIP, we're really kind of focusing in on the substation side, because your guys' distribution staff is gonna handle any kind of overhead to underground stuff.
Yeah.
From what we've discussed so far. So this is geared towards the substation side.
Right.
Right now, we have 2.5 million estimated for the substation switchgear upgrades. And so I would say that, probably 10% of that
Okay.
would be in engineering. Probably some of it, that probably includes the preliminary design phase, so I can get you, better estimate on that too, if I have a calculator.
It throws us in the ballpark. That's
Yeah.
really what I was looking to do.
Yeah, and like depending on this, if it's pretty clean, like, here we have the WAPA component.
Right.
So historically with the projects we've worked with WAPA on, whatever they gotta do, which would be pretty limited here, like, we're talking some metering things, metering attachments to the other bus that you guys currently aren't metered from. Some of that metering stuff, like to think that's pretty minimal on the scale of the costs here. It comes down to the switchgear and control building that we're kind of dialed in on. That scope is pretty straightforward for us, once we get the site items, so, you're probably, 10%.
Okay.
Yeah, but there's like I said, part of this is, we've got a contingency factor in this because of the WAPA factor. And we've seen recently that, and it's great, the WAPA agreement, I think that's mutually beneficial for everybody. You've got a redundant 115 loop here because the WAPA substation feeds your system. So one of those transmission lines goes out, you can get fed from the other direction. So that's a big benefit. A lot of utilities don't have a loop feed. It just gets to be, if WAPA's got to do anything, it just costs more than if we were to have a regular contract. So some stuff we'd like to trim down those details in the preliminary phase. Yeah, and so the way that this task order works is, there's no other fees really until we get them in front of you, and you have to approve any amendments to this task order, is how we approve that. So we can't just add numbers to this,
Right.
indiscriminately. It all has to be amended through a council-approved motion.
And that really gets, we finalize that more after the preliminary design phase is done, right?
Yes. Yeah, after preliminary design's wrapped up, we'll provide a memo talking about, here's the scope as we see it, here's what we did. And essentially, with that memo, we're gonna provide an amendment proposal to where you guys can look at it and say, yay or nay. Then at that point, it's up to you guys, and at that time, we'll have a good financial picture in the discussions with Missouri River and your finance folks, so.
So how much upgrading would WAPTA have to do to their part?
So really at this point, what I am anticipating is that today, this kind of helps looking at a one-line diagram. So I don't know the best way to, I'm gonna mark this up and you guys can pass it around, but I anticipate that the vast majority of their work would be on the facilities that they own and the metering associated with that. So currently on the, I'm gonna call it the East WAPA 12.5 kV bus, Rosebud that's Rosebud's metering. So Rosebud also takes the feed off of the transformer you have a majority stake in. WAPA owns the bus, so everything associated and attached to that bus, they have domain over. And we're really comfortable with it, essentially looking at current transformers and PTs, power transformers, so just metering stuff. And, they're gonna charge the heck out of it, but even that being said, it shouldn't be a big deal. It's mainly outdoor. But one of the things that could fluctuate here is if you could get a pad mount set up, that'd be better. It's not exposed to the elements. We see outdoor CTs and outdoor PTs fail more than pad mount metering setups. So one of the things we would work through is, okay, WAPA, can we put in a pad mount metering device? Can we own it? Or do you have to own it and run it back to your control building? So They would be associated with the metering of that additional feed. That's about it. We would have the power cables and everything from that point. That would be Winter's wheelhouse, and then it's just a matter of site access, because there's plenty of real estate there to work out, so. I'm gonna just note this and you guys can pass it around. It's noted as WAPA's responsibility. Spell. Estimated, because we don't know for sure on that, so go ahead and pass that on. It's in blue pen there. That'd be the only spot that would be WAPA's responsibility. That is assuming there's enough real estate there to not have to move the fence or the site. You got plenty of room there today, in my opinion, but it really depends on what their build out looked like and if they were planning on ever using that space. So, again, details there as to what the footprint looks like. We gotta just hash it out.
I'm gonna back up 1 second. Do you know what a bus is? The functionality, can you just go through that real briefly, what the bus is, so that these guys understand what you're
Bus,
talking about?
yes, not a large yellow vehicle. No, it's essentially a node in basic electric terms, but it's aluminum pipe or a conductor. So you have, for a three-phase bus, you've got 3 phases, essentially a metallic or conductive element that electrical components attached to, and it's a common node, it's a common point. So a junction, if you follow. So a junction of connections that could go either way from that bus. And in WAPA's bus, I believe it's tubular, like 2-inch aluminum or something. Which is
Yeah.
pretty standard. The city's bus, city owns a separate bus north to where the reclosers are attached, and that's our pinch point, that's our single contingency. If that goes down, or if something happens there, you lose the circuits into town. So that, I believe, is angle aluminum, I think is what they put up there when they installed that.
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's angle bus, but yeah, just aluminum bus with terminal pads that instrument transformers like the metering PTs can attach to, or, different switches or breakers can be mounted on.
Looking at that same diagram, there's a lot of chatter when we're talking about the substation, that it's the transformers in phase 1 that will be replaced. They're not replaced in phase 1. Looking at this diagram, in phase 2, we would address the mutual transformer out at the WAPA site. Is the west transformer addressed in phase 3? I didn't see the phase 3 with this, or will we address that west transformer?
Right, the primary unit
Yes.
is not addressed in the study.
Right.
So the costs don't include that. It needs, what it is kind of in a, a beyond 10-year look, is budgeting and considering basically an emergency fund needed if that goes down. So.
What's the cost on that, Jared, if it goes
Oh,
down? Just if
you're looking at, for that large unit, that 33 MVA tub,
Yeah.
you're looking at least $2 million.
Okay.
At that point, in 10 years, it's gonna be crazy.
Current
Yeah.
plan on that is to do the $100,000 renovation to a change in oil. Is that correct, if I remember?
Not the 33, the one that we share with Rosebud would
So
be
we're not addressing the west one, we're just addressing,
the east one with that
The shared
100,000.
one.
Yep.
I think that's, people are wondering, asking in the community, and I had the understanding we weren't gonna address the west one, the 33B tub, and we won't.
Yeah.
And that's something that we have to address outside the scope of this study.
Yeah. And if I can elaborate a little bit on the rationale there, is you know, there's some agreement items we recommend addressing with WAPA on your guys' shared ownership with Rosebud and WAPA on that equipment. Your capacity agreement with WAPA on the one that you and WAPA share ownership of is the primary tub.
Right.
That is probably okay for your guys' projected peak. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
It's the Rosebud one that if you guys can't utilize the full 12.5 MVA capacity of it, it's really not an adequate backup for your system.
Correct.
So you gotta really hope that you're in the shoulder months.
If something happens.
If something happens, which is, you know, generally, your peak is in the winter time, which helps. So you're gonna get additional, it all depends on how cold it is, but you have additional leeway there in the winter time. But your summer peak is actually right there at your capacity limits and that cost share relationship with Rosebud. So where I'm going with this is anymore, these power transformers are so expensive. It used to be where you would say, you got 30 or 40, I mean, let's be real. There's a lot of aged transformers out there today,
Right.
and they were built really well back then. But I mean, how long are you gonna run it? So we've seen transformers, it's not out of the question to get 50 to 60 years out of them. But man, if it's your only one that's rated adequately, you better have another one. And our rationale is that this old beast, and it's not that old, it's the 80s. I mean, used to be pretty new when they started. That was still pretty fresh.
The things
So-
in the 80s are built right.
Right, yeah, it was fine, you know, there's a lot of copper and steel in that aren't in the new ones, we'll just say.
They don't make anything like us anymore.
No.
The 80s kids are pretty good.
Yeah, right, exactly. So anymore, it's like, it used to be, yeah, that thing's 30, 40 years old, budget for a replacement. Well, you know, regardless of if you had two or one, or whatever. Well, anymore, it's like, well, we just need to start doing maintenance on the one we have, which is pretty common that nobody does maintenance. They're pretty static, but what
Yeah.
people don't understand is the moving parts in the LTC, and that's what typically fails. In my experience, you know, you'll have issues with that on 10-year-old transformers. And because there's ice cube relays, there's, you know, actuators, and just a lot of things that have to happen in an LTC to change the tap of that, for that voltage, you know, regulation. So that's number one, is let's get a backup, a new backup that allows you to maintain your primary transformer properly. And vice versa. So your primary unit, that carries you obviously no problem. The Rosebud unit right now needs a little work. Sounds like WAPA's kind of spearheading that quoting.
Yeah.
And they're
Primary.
set up.
That was WAPA spirit.
The one that we share, WAPA, is kind of
Needs
ramrodding.
work.
Yeah, it needs to work. It has an oil leak on it.
It's older too, right?
Yeah, I'm probably thinking that it's probably 60s when that contract was wrote. Don't know if it was new then, but I'm assuming that was set out there in the 60s when the contract was wrote.
The east, or the west.
The east one. The west one's our main one. The east one's the one we share, and that's
So
the
you think
one.
the east one was set there in the 60s?
Yeah, and that's when that contract that the city signed was wrote, and there's no date on them, and there's no date on the new one that we primary use, but going with what the contracts were wrote, they had to be new, set there, then that's what I'm assuming.
80s,
Right,
yeah.
are out there, so.
Yeah, the construction prints that we saw for your guys' current primary transformer, that was in the, I think that was in the 80s.
Yeah, 84
Yeah.
is when the,
Can I ask this question? If we're doing these renovations on the backup and we fail to plan for, or have a plan if something happens to our prime, are we making a mistake by not considering the primary, that 33 V-tub, as we're talking about this? Just asking,
Yeah, I would certainly I would, it's 2 years after receipt of order minimum to get one of these things.
Right.
But if you have 2 transformers, you're sitting pretty good. I mean, that's just the fact. Like, we're looking at N-1, which is, N is normal, minus 1 piece of equipment. You can look at N-2, which is a disaster, right? So that is, I'm a conservative guy, planner by nature, so I'm of the belief, if I was in this town, I would want a lot of things, because I don't have a ton of faith in the grid. But I know how quickly it can be taken away. I'd have one bought and sitting right there. That's what I would do.
That's what I'm asking.
But that's not reasonable when you're dealing with public funds necessarily. But if it's me, that's what I'm doing, because it takes 2 years.
Yeah.
And these transformer manufacturers are not helpful.
Right.
Because when you ink something with them now, there's all kinds of escalators. It used to be, not long ago, 5, 6 years ago, you could get a firm contract with these transformer suppliers. And they were hungry for work, and you could say, they'd spit out this standard terms and conditions, and you'd say, with the attorney, you'd redline it, say, nope, this is the firm price, 5-year warranty, firm deadline with liquidated damages. You guys pay, and you could get them to pay liquidated damages if they screwed up. You can't do that anymore. They're too busy.
Yeah.
There's too many private entities like large cooperatives that have blanket contracts where they go out and they order 50 transformers for the next 10 years.
Same thing we were saying.
Yeah.
And they use up all of their factory bandwidth, and then they leave a little bit for like publicly bid small municipals, because they're not the big money makers, because they're competitive bids, plus bid bonds and all kinds of protective elements of the statute. So really, in the last 5 years, there's been a paradigm shift. And so what we see now is they give you a lead time of, 100 to 120 weeks with escalations and a little equation you have to figure out. And then they take the LDs that are required by contract, or that you put in the form of contract in the bid documents, and they say, no, we're gonna cap those at 5%. And then they say, once you get a month away from factory start, they say, we miswound the coils, so we've gotta send the copper back. And whether or not that's true or not, they bump the schedule back a month, and you're sitting there. And now, instead of having the delivery in January, when the ground was frozen, so you can get a lowboy in there for a 150,000 pound piece of equipment, now you're talking about April, where everything's thawing out, and you got essentially a dozer or a payloader you need to have standing by to pull the guy out, because the transformer supplier blew the contract. So in more than one instance, that's the exact situation that you're dealing with. So with me, I'm looking at it like, you have 2 transformers, one's not adequate for future load growth, and it's old. We need to plan to replace that one, and if you have 2, you're sitting pretty good. And if we can get a dual bus configuration, it alleviates your guys' N-1 in the substation. So you have options. You can take down one bus to service it, to test the relays, to do all the things, and then you have another bus to back it up whenever you want. You don't need to wait for the shoulder months in April or October, which you have some ag loads in that time frame. But so long story short,
You think we need to address the 33B tub too?
yeah, at the end of
That's
10
what
years,
I'm
though, I
wondering.
mean, have the funds allocated for it. And so, yeah, it's like, I really didn't want this to get above $20 million, so you kind of.
But council needs to hear
Yeah.
the true reality. This is the scope and why you did it, but that 33B tub, you should probably be thinking about that too, right now.
Would it be a viable option for us to kind of flop Rosebud, the one we share with Rosebud, and our main transformer, get a new one for the west one, and then have that 33 MVA tub as kind of our backup if we could obviously have to do some legal talk with Rosebud as far as, hey, you know, we're switching these two. Would that be an option for us to?
Could be if we knew that the new one was gonna be more reliable than a well-serviced existing one.
Right.
But that's a good point, because,
It might extend us out, you know, 10 years as far as having to buy 2 and 10 instead of
Yeah.
1 and 10
yeah,
would be kind of where I was going, where we'd have enough capacity between us and Rosebud, obviously on that, and then we would buy one probably equivalent to that and have the capacity on that.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good point. The issue you get into is, how do you do the switcheroo?
Yeah, there'd be a lot of, because they're gonna benefit from that way more than the city
Yeah.
is, because they're getting a newer tub.
Yeah.
You know, they can, with the percentages, they're gonna be able to put more load on it too, on top of that. Plus, you know, every other cost that goes involved with it. But
Yeah, and that's why it's probably critical to look at that. If you do anything new, you gotta relook at those cost share agreement.
Yeah.
And, you know, you could even potentially, I don't know how critical it is as part of Rosebud's system. They're normally like what, like a couple meg or something off of that?
Yeah.
So,
And they have the ability to backfeed.
yeah, they have ability to backfeed, so it's just a matter of what are their needs here? If we go with a bigger transformer, they might not want to own 33.5%. They may want to own 10%. That being said, that does help purchase it as well. And we don't have any of that included, like the cost share stuff, because it's kind of, in my opinion, it kind of just needs to be looked at, but. So the other component is if you can use that full 12.5 MVA rating, until your guys' load, you could, you know, a load matures to that, you're at 11.1 is your peak, your historical peak. As that load matures, if you see that load come on, then you're saving money, and, or, you know, however you want to look at it. You know, part of that is if you can use the full 12.5 meg under an emergency situation, you're probably fine as long as that transformer is serviced and maintained. But it is old, so it's like to me, yeah. And the other thing is I wouldn't just be scrapping these transformers anymore. I would keep that one, set it off to the side.
Have
and
it serviced?
refurbish it even, have them recondition it. There's shops that can show up on site. You know, what does that 100,000 include?
Isn't it like the oil?
They're changing the oil, they're probably gonna go through the LPC, which is probably overdue.
yeah, then there's a leak on the bottom that they couldn't fix without it. It was kind
So
of,
they're gonna fix the leak as well.
yeah.
Because it's, you know, right now, you know, we get third-party quotes to do this sort of stuff, LTC maintenance, filter the oil, they drain the tank, go through all the contacts, check all the different nodes and actuators in everything. And, you know, it's like 30 grand. So it's, you gotta fix the tank, then you're getting a welder on site. That's where the extra
Man.
money is probably.
It's on the bottom
bottom.
of the transformer too. Huge.
Yeah, so you gotta drain everything.
And I think they might have to pull off the cooling fins on one
Yeah.
part of it too, and
Yep.
put the gaskets on them and stuff like
Yep,
that.
replace
So,
gaskets, yep.
so yeah, there was a couple different leaks from what he told me, so.
Yeah, and that's all pretty normal for a 50, 60-year-old transformer.
Maybe, I don't know if you said it, and if so, I apologize. How often do you need to do this maintenance?
Yeah, so the LTC is really the primary maintenance, but that's the most frequent. So typically, I mean, the manufacturer recommends, this is out of the manual, 5 to 7 years, or after the first 500,000 operations, and then after that, every 100,000 operations. There's something in there, but it's usually 5 to 7 years is what
Okay.
it comes out to be.
Okay.
And our last maintenance was.
Unknown.
Yeah.
I don't know. You know.
We can't find it.
WAPA.
I've asked them,
I think back in 16, we did some sort of a maintenance on one of those right when I came onto council. I think there was something.
We did oil testing last year as far as on the main tank on the primary one, but from what the contract's reading, that WAPA is supposed to be doing that. I think we have a $2,500 payment that we do every year for that on there, but I've never found any sort of reports, and I don't know if I'm assuming that they're requestable. I mean, we should have,
Should, yeah.
you know,
But
we're
it's-
paying for it, we should have access to them, but
But it's the federal government.
yeah.
So it's like,
Who do you-
it's a huge footprint that WAPA operates, and, you know, they just have a few guys like you and I sitting there behind dispatch and doing the engineering and design and stuff, and I think they've reached max capacity, and now they're starting to even sub out engineering things, you know, which is why, last year, they tried to hit Kurt up for $3,500 just to get some settings out. that I was
Settings in
requesting.
one line, that was
Yeah.
inside the shack, so.
Yeah, so we just talked to the local guy, which is always he's pretty good to work with, it sounds like, so. Yeah, there's a lot there, it's good that WAPA's got, you know, they're gonna want control over their site and control the maintenance probably, I don't know if you wanna even get out of that, but
No.
do they do the oil samples for you, or can you take oil samples?
I don't know if I can take them, but I did.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
There.
yeah, you did the kit with ATI, right? You
Yeah,
did the kit and
yeah,
stuff? Yeah.
I guess that's what
Yeah.
we did on there. We did them before even knowing about the contract that they were doing the maintenance and stuff like that, and we took the oil sample, I guess. I don't know the legal ramifications from it, but it was done.
Yeah, I mean, you guys own, you know, yeah, it's, when we set up this arrangement, I'm sure, we wanted to deal with all this stuff, because you gotta hire the appropriate staff to have the technical knowledge to pull samples. Now you have that, obviously, with the staff, and, you know, to me, you just like to be proactive, so you wanna test it at least once a year. 2 times is optimal. And every time you test it, you're dropping the oil just ever so slightly. And so at some point, after a number of samples have been taken, you have to top it off. And when that occurs,
You're probably more concerned on the LTC tanks on that than the main
that's the main
tank.
thing. That's what
Yeah.
usually goes wrong, unless there's some sort of, I mean, heat is
Yeah.
what wears on the static components of the transformer. So when you don't have, if you have a well-protected transformer, you know, relay protection and stuff, it's gonna reduce any, you know, fault impacts on the tub, and it's gonna preserve it longer. And you have that, you know, protected with interrupters and relay control, so all that looks pretty decent, so.
Jared, I've heard you mention a couple times, I believe, that it seems like to me what you said anyway was an older functioning transformer is known to be good, can almost be better than a brand new one because you know what you have.
Yeah.
Did I take that from what you said a
It's-
couple times?
Yeah, and it's more or less we've seen so many of these old tubs just be strong, you know, you'll have your failures and stuff, usually triggered by an event of some sort. But to me, it's just the kind of, and it might be an unfair look at modern manufacturing versus the old style. So now it's all about, you know, the lean, they plug in the ratings needed to computer programs most of the time, and it tells them this is the bare minimum copper you need, or this is the bare minimum core elements, and they're running it just right at requirement, because it's gonna save money. So that's where that comes from, it's just knowing the manufacturing side is leaner now, versus some of these old tubs, because it was simpler, they honestly built it up probably beyond the rating that was required, because it was easier, and they were just gonna do 4 or 5 of these things, and it saved them money in the process to just do the same design and just the rating, and they may have taken off some conductive material, or totally speculating here, but it just seems like they kind of probably overbuilt stuff back
Yeah.
then. Which, yeah, that's just kind of what we've seen, like you see these, I don't even know, I'm not really that familiar with the manufacturer of your guys' current primary one, because I've never heard of them before. Can't even tell you who they are right now, but it's been there 40 years. I mean, usually what we see is in the first, we usually require like a 5-year all-in warranty. Usually in that first 5 to 10 years, if something's gonna happen, it happens. Just the nature of,
I thought it always happened at year 5 years, 2 months, 3
Well,
months.
yeah, to the extent they can control that. I mean, that's like my water heater, 6 years old, 5-year warranty or whatever, but, yeah, so.
Takes 2 people to carry one out, the old one. Takes one person to carry the new one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and like, what's interesting is like that Rosebud transformer, that thing looks just as big as that 33 MVA. Like, it looks just as big, and it's rated as for like a third. So right there, it's like, okay, what are these guys doing versus, you see it all over the place. And the size of these can vary wildly. It doesn't even necessarily have to do with the rating. It's just manufacturing process. And it's an interesting market, that's for sure.
What would be a timeline for everybody to kind of know as far as if we started today, were we looking 3 years out to say this project started and everything like that?
Yeah,
As far as
so-
a sub portion built, I
Yeah, and
guess.
so, this task order is mainly for phase 1 items, to dial that in, but it could certainly look beyond as needed. It's just, so like of the 2.5 million for the substation switchgear upgrades, you're looking at the primary items here, or the major material items are the metal clad switchgear that's inside the control building. The control building, which is essentially a sturdy metal enclosure, typically 42 by 36 feet with a concrete foundation. Those are at least about a year out. They're prefabricated with wiring and everything at the factory, and they come and they set it, there's a split for trucking, and they set it down, connect everything, and it's all integrated with this metal-clad switchgear that's inside. So there's the switchgear element, the control building element, they're both about a year out, a year to year and a half out after receipt of order. And then you have the construction component, which is, you need a contractor to coordinate all that, coordinate the setting of the switchgear, coordinate the setting of the control building on the pad or the foundation. And then you have the power cable, which is typically done underneath the construction contract. So the way I would look at it is we need about a year for design, a few months here, depending on communications with WAPA and financial things, 3 to 6 months, another 3 to 6 months to bid the materials and the construction contract, and then about a year after the bidding is when you'd start to receive things and start construction in the substation, roughly. So you're looking at about 2.5 years from right now, if we were to get started, and as aggressive as the city would want to go with that. But- So yeah, like I've got out to 28, just because, that's about right, it's 24. You could do the substation stuff by 2020, end of 2026, depending on the overhead underground stuff that you guys get done in the meantime. That might be another couple years there, so. Other component is this grant that we're hoping to get applications in for. I do have the switchgear and control building upgrades in there, or at least a large portion of it. So that kind of plays into how aggressive we go here. But the thought is that that grant gets applied for in April, and by the end of the year, you would know if you're gonna get funding for that control building. Essentially undergrounding of the substation. I would not bank on that, but it's something that, you know, engineering should probably be done ahead of time, so you're ready to go. But you gotta be mindful that we can't make too much progress if we wanna wait around for the grant. But that's also, this is round 2 of the GRIP grant. So the first round was rejected, like we didn't get the award for that. Who knows what the second round will be, I don't. And then beyond that, who knows with politics changing and everything, how much money is gonna be distributed at that point, but. That's just a side component that probably, you just probably, before the letter of commitment is made in this grant, saying that you're gonna come up with the 25%, the city will have to decide if you wanna wait around for it or not.
Typically speaking, you say, or is there a typically speaking under these grants as far as how much of it you expect the city would have to pay up front as opposed to what the grant might have available?
Cost share, 80/20, 90/10.
Yeah,
Yeah, cost share for this is like, I think 25/75.
25, 75,
Yeah.
okay.
25 our cost.
Yeah, yep, 25-year cost. I mean, it'd be great,
Yeah.
but there's all this grant administration stuff that,
Yeah.
I mean, it's something, you know.
Whose arm do we have to twist to get the grant?
So were
It's very
we
federal.
in round 1, GRIP, GRIP? Is that what we said, GRIP?
GRIP, it's an acronym for.
Yeah, but that's what you said, GRIP.
GRIP.
We were not in the first round, okay.
Right, yeah, we
I
weren't
thought you
even-
said we were denied, but
Yeah, sorry, good delineation there.
we missed that. We weren't in on it.
You weren't in on it, but we were helping other utilities with
And-
and they all got denied.
No one got it.
No
Now,
one
you had said here at our council meeting that our community dynamics may lend to us being a higher percentage of qualifying for it, or?
Yeah, so it's hard to tell, because we have yet to get awarded any of this GRIP infrastructure.
Is there anybody that was
Yeah.
denied that had a similar community dynamic as us?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And it was, and these aren't treated on an individual basis. This is part of a regional grant application effort, which is looked at, it's a consortium, is what they're calling it. But it's looked at as being beneficial because of the footprint. It's impacting South Dakota utilities, Minnesota, and Iowa utilities that we work for. We're trying to get our projects into this large grant that has certain earmarks associated with it. But yeah, in that first grant go-around, there were just as 40 communities is what they're considered, but there's lots of things that go into that. They have a climate component, how communities are disadvantaged with the climate crisis we're in currently. And also it's like, you know, Native American density, population density. I think Winter's like 19% Native American. It's in a Justice 40 block. And it probably has to do with some of the Rosebud tribal lands kind of scattered throughout the county. But yeah, that does look good in this grant, or so we're told, to where it's definitely worth a shot. But yeah, it by no means guarantees anything. I mean, it's a, to me, it's a long shot to improve.
Is it one of those things where really the whole region either wins or loses?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like, there's, oh, I can't, I'm helping 2 other utilities with a portion of this grant. And one's up in Minnesota, here in South Dakota, and then another one in Minnesota. But, yeah, it's like you got this scattered utilities throughout the tri-state area, essentially, the clients we work with. And RECs in Minnesota, some other folks are involved with it. Yeah, it's like, it's all or nothing for those. Not some of them are gonna get it and some of them don't.
Right.
So it really is up to the grant writers to develop the narrative that the feds wanna.
Some strategy to
Yeah.
make it
So,
fit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and just kind of like sugarcoating stuff.
Yep.
Like, you know, everybody in there just wants to increase reliability of their electric systems.
Right.
But you have to talk about it a certain way. And, you know, for lack of better terminology, yeah, it's like making it look really good.
Yep, yep.
We're not grant writers by trade, so we just develop the technical component, try to coordinate that with the utilities and their staff, and then see what happens, but.
Yep.
So what's the good news? I like asking that. What's the good news?
Good news?
Because so far, you're telling us it's a long shot to get the grant. Do you really want to wait around to try and get this grant, which pays 75% of a big number?
Yeah.
And that's to fall on us to whether we're supposed to wait or make a
We
decision.
fail if we don't address the problems,
Yeah,
because we're 2.5 years out.
right.
We can't count on that. We've never counted on anybody else. We've been able to attack things ourselves.
The first time we're talking, I didn't hear it as being a long shot. I heard that because of our community dynamic, hey, the group is gonna wanna have you in here, there's a good shot to get this grant. And now it's like, oh yeah, that's teasing,
Well,
that's teasing.
you're right on it. It's helped you to get in on the application, is more or less what that looks like. We don't hurt the application, but whether it increases our chances,
So if we move forward in 2 weeks, whatever, pick it, just pick a time frame. When does commitment dollars have to be put forward? In 2 years or in a month?
With this country.
for this project.
Nah, I'm talking, yeah, for transformers, when you're saying, okay, we fail if we don't start now, okay, and it's 2 years before we get a transformer, or a year before we get a building, do we have to put down a deposit to order these things, or we just put our name on the list and then we can start laying money away?
Yeah, no, it's kind of the staging of how this goes, right?
Maybe I'm not understanding everything, but that's.
Yep,
tell
aside
me.
from the transformer, that's kind of phase 2, but if you guys wanted to look at that, the transformer isn't something the grant they don't pay for transformers, right? So it's
Okay.
purely, so,
We need to put together a plan now to go forward without.
Transformer's not part of the grant, the building that goes
building
over the
switchgear,
transformer.
yes, building switchgear, addressing the WAPA interface, getting a dual substation bus configuration. So we would do, right now, it would just be the preliminary phase here as we get through it, so the 30 grand or whatever, over the next however many months, 2 to 3 to 4 months, potentially. Then you have firming up of the full design scope and that money, so the engineering would essentially be the only stuff in '24, be engineering, so up to 10% of, we'll say 2 million, so roughly a couple $100,000 or whatever that ends up being, roughly a couple $100,000 this year. You go out for bids and take bids, review the bids. All that's engineering. This is the only thing you're paying. Enter into agreement with a supplier. And there's no down money. No down money. It's all these contracts that the states, according to state bidding requirements, are upon receipt. Today is that's how that looks.
Yeah.
Power transformers are different because they like money up front. They have different payment plans you can do. You can get a firmer price if you pay 40% up front so they can buy the raw materials, for example. Well, with the substation, control building, and switchgear and cable, it's upon receipt. So it'd be roughly 40 to 60 weeks. You receive it, you pay within 30 days of that delivery invoice. So you're looking at probably not until 26 paying for anything. And that'll be in part of the cash flow we help put together and feed into Missouri River's rate and your guys' budget process. So really, you got a couple $100,000 over the next year. And then after that, you're probably looking at that $1 million in 2026. And then there's the construction component, say another $500,000 or whatever.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
According to figure 8, the one that you passed around.
Yeah.
When does the removal of the old section come out? When, at the end of the construction of the controlled environment and
Yeah.
everything switching over?
There'd be a full commissioning of the new control building.
So that's at the end of phase
Yes.
1 transitioning to phase
Yes,
2?
yes.
Okay.
You'd keep that because you want to keep town power. And then on a feeder by feeder basis, we would cut over to the control building. They
Okay.
typically put like a tunnel underneath the switchgear where we'd have the contractor cut over the underground terminals. We'd probably bury a portion of those 1 or 2 egress circuits to a point, kind of part of the planning process, but then you have all those cables made up, terminators all ready to go, brief cut over for each circuit. You maintain city power, or at least the plan would be you maintain city power throughout this whole process. You cut over you would have to get fed from this, potentially the Rosebud unit, while you're eliminating the connections, and you cut over the 12.5 connection to your primary transformer. There's a cut over there. So you'd be leaning on that, we'll call it the Rosebud unit for lack of a better term, but it's your unit, you own a majority share. So the Rosebud unit would backfeed you while you're transferring and cutting over the underground cables to the existing main transformer. That actually, that construction process goes pretty quick, because you're having a prefabricated control building on a concrete foundation. That's all getting constructed, as soon as that construction contract gets let. You can get concrete and stuff. Concrete and the forming, that's all gonna be ready-made, so the contractor's just gonna need to set the new control building, do some internal wiring, and then get your secondary, or get your main cable connections to the existing bus, kind of all prepped and ready to go. And that's a pretty clean situation.
Did you say most of this will be underground?
Yeah, yep. You're gonna be underground from, WAPA's got that 12.5 bus, which isn't ideal, but it's a split bus, so you have 2 of them. So you got some, and it's built really, it's tubular bus, so it's really sturdy. You're not talking loose cables and strain bus conductors. It's pretty sturdy, it's legit. Goes immediately underground, and then everything you own up in that sub would be underground or in a control building. So to me, that's a huge deal for when you're doing anything.
So
at the
all of our part
substation.
would be out of the elements.
Yes, yes. And metal clad switchgear is incredibly reliable compared to overhead recloser bus, just for all the apparent reasons. Varmints. The climate's maintained in that 70 to 75, 78 degrees. Things you'll have to think about are, is it the right time to do a SCADA project? To where in Kurt's office, does he want to be able to monitor your guys' circuit loads? To me, I do, if it's me. And then you know exactly what loads you're seeing, you know exactly, if there's an operation, you know what feeder it is, you can immediately know where you need, what you need to backfeed, you know, and that to me is the way I would go. But a lot of people aren't like that, because they don't grasp onto that technology. You know, we have clients that are like, no SCADA, I don't wanna look at screens, and that's staff driven, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
What's the anticipated useful life for the building, switchgear and that kind of type of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the building's gonna be
50 years?
forever. The building is, I mean, I'm not gonna be around, it's easy to make guarantees, but you're talking a sturdy metal building. I mean, unless it gets a direct weather hit of a tornado or something.
I'm thinking more along the
useful
lines
life.
of the switchgear and all that equipment.
The switchgear component is, we don't rip out metal clad switchgear, we'll just say that. They've been around for, I mean, there's some metal clad switchgear we see today with old fuses and stuff, and that stuff's like 80, 90 years old.
Really? Wow.
And that's not really that even clean environment, they're not even maintaining it. So a metal clad switchgear, and what we would put in, it would be the controls might need upgrading in 20 years.
Okay.
You don't even need to test the electronic relays, but every 5, 10 years. And then that's easy to do, you just pull the isolation switches, test the relays, everything's good. You know, no moving parts, it's just electronics. You know, Schweitzer is what we usually design, for this industry class essentially. They'll have a random failure, but it's pretty minimal, and every 20 years you might look at replacing those. But now we're seeing 20 or 30-year-old electronic devices. And then those are only, you know, $3,000 to $4,000 a piece. So the metal and clad switchgear, nothing changes. You might clean it, go through it every 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
But man, it's the right way to do it. And that's because it's climate controlled, you keep condensation, corrosion is not, it's got battery backups for all of the electronics. So if you do lose power, you have emergency power to operate breakers if you need to. You know, it's a lot like the control building that's there today, that Bob has.
That we
Very similar. It'd be just like that, except we put a little bit more space in there for operations. We like the ability to put a desk in there, and it's kind of like a station point for, if you're doing a project and somebody's got to be standing by at the sub, you can make it comfortable where they can sit there and have internet access or whatever.
Room to turn around in.
Yeah, room to turn around, and safety clearances are what we look at.
Sure.
Because we'll be racking the breakers in
You be
there.
racking breakers in and out, and so you want to have PPE on, and you want to have, you know, there'll be a eye wash station and all the code things you gotta do. Because you got a big battery bank, we have sensors that monitor hydrogen and nitrogen content in the air. And so if something's wacky with the batteries, it tells, you know, through SCADA or alarms that you got something wonky there, or through a random substation check, you know, you get alarms and stuff. But
Your batteries are probably gonna be they got a 10-year lifespan.
Yep,
On
10
them.
years.
If you get that.
What's that? You'll get them pretty good. I mean, I dealt with them a lot in Brookings,
Yeah.
and I was there for over 10 years, and I think this year is the first year that they were changing out a string of batteries for it, so. And they were older than when I was there, and they're not cheap. They're probably 10, 12,000, I think, for a string, but but it's compared,
Relatively cheap.
Yeah, I
compared to
mean-
this, yes, but
Yeah, I mean, compared to,
to a Snicker bar to a $2 million thing, I guess, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of about the only thing, like what Jared was talking about, then like the electronics that we got out on our breakers right now are Kyle 4Cs, and those have got to be over 20 years, I would think. I've
yeah,
replaced-
they're early 90s.
Yeah, I've replaced those, so it's one of those things.
And it's just a different approach. I mean, your municipal system, you have a high concentration of folks needing power in one spot. And that, in our design, we're a municipal-based firm. We do some REC stuff. Because of the concentration of people, you have more folks reliable on a smaller footprint. We believe in a municipal system being designed differently than an REC system, where you have 10 miles of line and 4 customers, for example. You gotta operate different.
Right.
That's where the reclosers come into play. Side note, but, you know, protection schemes are different entirely from an underground system to an overhead system. You'll see the overhead blinks. You guys ever see blinks? Probably in WAPA system, you'll see little clickers. That's because everything's overhead, the lines flopping together or debris just just arcing momentarily. Well, those blinks are less desirable in the municipal system. Even if you have overhead, you'd almost rather have it just lock out, so you can go address the issue versus, you know, letting the squirrels, you know, cook free, cook, and, you know. So, there's just philosophy things that are different between municipal and an REC, which is you have an REC design in your substation today. 3 overhead reclosers, overhead bus. It's just, this is not a municipal design. Just totally different outlook on what reliability is acceptable, but also, yeah, just your limitations and switching and stuff, so. Total side note.
Good information.
Yeah, I
Great
mean, it's,
information.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just, when you live in the world, it's second nature to assume this stuff, but.
We can do this. We got this.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are set up good, you got great load for your town size. I mean, you're about the exact same residential population as Rock Rapids where I live. And about 40–50% more load, 60% more load because of your, you know, your economic, you got a Holiday Inn, you got the people come to, you know, we're right next to Sioux Falls, so everybody goes. We have, you know, Rock Rapids, because we're there, we've designed it for 40 years, we have a total underground system and loop transmission feed and indoor metal clad switchgear, multiple transformers and generation plant. So we never have
What's your
distribution.
generation plan?
Diesel, a couple
Diesel.
diesel units, we're gonna get another one, because of the Missouri River incentives. They're paying for, you know, 60–70% of.
Do you have a WAPA agreement?
Yeah, we do.
You do too?
Yep, Rock Rapids does. We're a Missouri River.
Go back to what you were saying, that they're paying right now for generation 60–70%.
Yeah, they're, so, off the cuff here, I'm not totally prepared to talk about that. Just doing some feasibility studies right now. We're looking at, for a smaller utility, they have about a 5 meg load. Same size town, but a 5 meg load. You guys have a 10+ meg load, you know, just for example. So your revenues per capita are better, twice as much roughly as these folks. And so they're gonna look at doing two 2.5 meg gen units, diesel. And it's gonna, over 20 years, about 70% of that's gonna be paid for by Missouri River through initial capacity payment,
Plus the district.
plus the $5
kilowatt hour.
Yeah. So for like 20, 30, because they want that capacity on the system.
They need it.
Yeah, they need it because they know, they see the writing on the wall. They've got a heavy Minnesota presence, and Minnesota's doing all kinds of wacky things at the legislative level. I mean, they're turning off coal plants, and they're just, Missouri River's like, no, we need to get, and this is the cheapest way for Missouri River to get distributed generation to support their system when these polar vortexes come through and wipe out the Texas grid, which is connected to our grid and all that stuff. So yeah, they're doing that, and, yeah, that's nice to have, because I've been in the office and there's an outage on the transmission with WAPA's transmission, and they're looped, right? So there'll be an outage and something happens, maybe they didn't have the breakers programmed right, but you drop the feeder, and our circuit is on the hospital circuit, so we're on the generation circuit, so our lights
So
immediately
what you're
come back on.
generating, you kick back
Yeah,
to your
it kicks
city
back
and
on, and
that's
it's, it's programmed to just kick on, and if you lose power, and then you're, okay, you're back on,
even though you're not being fed by WAPA.
Yeah. So,
Is that what happened a couple years ago? When Texas or whatever had that outage?
Yeah, the
That they
polar vortex thing, yeah.
pulled from us to,
They
Yeah,
get
there was all
rolling
kinds of-
brownouts is what they call them.
And we had to shed load, because once you don't have enough capacity, your voltage is gonna sag, and then before your voltage sags too much, you gotta cut the power, you're gonna have to collapse. And that's a cascading event that is big time problem. I think they have it in the coast and stuff all the time. So, yeah, I mean, that's Rock Rapids, and that's what I think is the ideal situation. You have buried, we don't have distribution issues. We have WAPA in and out. That's the way to go, and that's kind of the ideal municipal design. Because you got a hospital, you've got, critical commercial.
Can I ask you a question? Diesel generation versus solar with battery backup?
Yeah, it's just a cost thing. I was talking to Missouri River about this the other day, different client. I kind of knew you guys had talked about solar, and the issue with solar from Missouri River standpoint, and they can do a high level here, they can't, it's not as valuable to them to incentivize that capacity, because let's say you have a 1 meg solar or wind installation, you can only,
10 meg.
okay, 10. They can only account for that on their books or on their bankable load, like 10 to 20% of that. So it's only, they can only count on 10 to 20% of that. And because it's intermittent, it's totally not switchable, it's not,
reliable.
diesel, you fire up, and
You're generating electricity.
then in a catastrophe like the polar vortex, or even worse than that, that just affected a certain area, big area, but a certain area worse. Yeah, they could say, okay, winter you need to gen, and, okay, all right, crank up the gens, and you take that capacity burden from them, and keep the grid alive longer, Or if WAPA's like, hey, we're dumping winter because we need the capacity, you're like, okay, disconnect, throw
We
the gens
fire up
on.
and we distribute our own?
Yeah. And, Missouri River, they don't cover your full peak. They cover they're incentivizing about 99% of it. It's a time component. Because it's gotta stay behind the meter, they can't have you on paper feeding back to them, randomly, right? Like they need
Scheduled,
Yeah, it needs to be behind the meter. Like when they call on it, it just needs to cover your guys' load. not be pushing out onto the system, technically. So that's what's driving that, the max that they're willing to incentivize. For me, it's just like, okay, I'm doing a plant, we'll do our full load, you can incentivize this much, but we're gonna have this in case we need it. You know, for another, you throw another gen on there, three meg gen, and you're covered. I mean, all that's feasibility, you know, analysis stuff, but, and that's, I didn't really come prepared to talk generation, but I just.
That's all right, you brought it up. so-
Yeah, I just kind of mentioned it, like, that's what Rock Rapids has, and,
Yeah.
and to your point that you can do this, absolutely, compared to, your revenues are better than those smaller communities per capita. You have, there, you just have a lot more commercial and stuff going on, so to me, at a high level, it's like, yeah, I absolutely should be able to cover this.
Been a great meeting. Any other questions or comments or anything else you'd like to touch on, Garrett?
You know, I did bring, you know, part of this preliminary task, we have a financial coordination component. We don't do a ton of the rate studies, formal rate, full-on cost of service and rate studies for MRES members, generally because Missouri River does that, right? And we don't compete with them, we're comrades, so to speak. So we just kind of facilitate that and give them cash flow or whatever on the technical side. Well, you know, some of the things we can look at as far as, I just brought up, the only thing I had on my list here was just talk about rate, you know, what a rate, full-on rate analysis would look like if we did it. And it's totally not something we have to get into any detail on, but I do have stuff that, as far as you want to take our analysis of rates, we can do additional analysis to supplement whatever Missouri River's doing. Kind of as a separate deal, but just to let you know, we look at, we can develop a financial model that has the schedule of what the costs are gonna be. We can look at how your rate structure is, and if it's imbalanced compared to your supply agreement and ratio of commercial load, where kind of industry values are compared to other municipals. We can really go through with a microscope. I don't know what Missouri River does, but I'm guessing we probably dig into more of like the philosophy behind it, and if that needs to be adjusted at all. And that's kind of a side note. I've got some mock scopes here, or typical scopes, with no fees or anything, but just kind of, I could leave this with you guys.
Please.
And you could just, it just simply has bullet points that it's for Troy or you guys to just kind of look at. But that's the only other thing. And then I was just gonna visit with Kurt, Troy afterwards about distribution stuff.
I was gonna visit with council real quick about, so we can end this and then we'll all go our separate ways and have our conversations.
Yeah.
Garrett, thank you.
Yeah, and I can step out too and visit with Kurt, these guys.
You're welcome to sit in.
Go ahead.
Coffee.
I don't. It's not your girl.
But it's
We
hot,
have
right?
free will offer.
That's what I'm